Let's bring in Dan Woike, our buddy, LA Times Lakers beat writer, among other responsibilities. Do you like him? I mean, I hope you like him more than you like Barkley.
Wow.
Roasting him.
Good analysis from Dan.
Okay, so we were talking about this.
Baseball attendance?
I'm sorry, I'm a loser. Okay, so there's 3 players in history that they're hard to quantify.
Yep.
Magic literally could get you 42 points playing center. Mm-hmm. You're like, I love Bob Cousy. That's not the way it works. LeBron was positionless. I'm going to guard Derrick Rose. Mm-hmm. I'm going to guard a 4. Jokic has sort of become that, hasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, I tweeted something about this the other day after kind of listening to some Jokic discussions on television and stuff like that. And people really struggle, I think, to talk about him because there's no historical comp. And when we have these conversations about players, usually like we lean on these historical comps as a crutch. Like you can say, even with LeBron, for instance, right? Like at least with LeBron, like you could point to Jordan's magnetism, Kobe's proficiency and stuff like that. And LeBron is a totally different player, but you could look at like best player in the league, like type of, there's a straighter line drawn between those 3 guys. I mean, if we're going to have like a real honest discussion about what Nikola Jokic is doing on the court, I mean, you start pulling some wild names and you start mixing them together, right? It's like, okay, so there's some Bill Walton passing, but better. Moses Malone's size and rebounding, maybe. Arvydas
Sabonis,
Dirk's touch. You start adding all of these guys. I mean, like he runs the fast break, like kind of like Magic Johnson,
right?
So it's really hard to have a straightforward like this is who this player is because we have not seen players who play like this. This is completely unique. I was at an event earlier this week, and we were talking to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and Jokic's name came up, and it was sort of like he was just basically like no one approached the game at the center position the way Nikola Jokic did when I played. Like, I mean, he's completely foreign. It is like basically like going to the 1920s and giving someone an iPhone, and like their head would explode. Like I have access to all the information in the world. Like this is a guy who can do everything on offense. He looks like he should be slow, but somehow he's the fastest guy down the court. Like he throws every pass. He makes every shot. Like he has as the kids would say, an unlimited bag, right? He the skill set is insane.
Yeah.
And, he's on his way to having a championship, which is like the ultimate validation. And like, if he gets that, that'll make it a little bit easier. But I mean, when we start talking about kind of what he's done over these past 3 years, you look at the efficiency, you look at the counting stats, you look at the winning generally too in the regular season. It's pretty unmatched.
Well, our staff put this up earlier because assists now mean more than they did 15 years ago because they can become threes, not 2.
Points created.
Yeah. Jokic, he's not double Shaq, and Shaq was certainly valuable. He is a mile ahead of all-timers, Duncan and Shaq. Mm-hmm. He's worth 54 points a game. And people say, well, he's not as good defensively. For the record, Duncan was great defensively, so was Giannis. But it is an 80-20, 70-30 offensive league.
Sure, and I think, I do think that his defense is probably you can focus on the things he can't do, right? Like you wouldn't put him in a switch on a pick and roll the same way you would Bam Adebayo or Anthony Davis or some of these guys who are like these total, Swiss Army knives on defense. But one thing Nikola Jokic is gigantic. And you watch him and the way his strength and the way he like holds his ground around the rim, it gave Anthony Davis real problems in the conference finals. Yeah. And like he's got great hands. He deflects passes. He's a really smart player. I think like him being terrible on defense is pretty overstated.
Yeah.
I think it's more, again, like, yes, he has shortcomings on that end of the basketball, but I think he maximizes what he has.
Also, the Warriors have always done a good job to insulate Steph's weaknesses with Klay Thompson, Draymond. The length of the Nuggets, Gordon and Porter, masks some of the deficiencies of Jokic. They're just so damn long. They volleyball stuff
And
out.
I think over time, like Jokic too, Steph's defense totally overstate. Like
he tries.
Yeah, he got better on that side of the ball. Using his smarts, using his increased strength. I mean, he's still a very slight person, but you look at before and after pictures, basically from Steph's third year to now. I mean, he looks like Schwarzenegger compared to what he used to look like. and I think Jokic again, similarly, is trimmed down. He's changed his body.
There was a lot of pudding there 3 years ago.
Probably some, some Serbian delicacy, I'm sure. But I think he's now though a guy who understands exactly what his limitations are, and he's figured out ways to maximize what he can do. And I think, when you're talking about great players, I mean, he checks the biggest boxes, right? He makes his teammates better, which is, I think, when you're talking about the tippy top guys. Because that's the difference between being a winner and
Bird and
that's
LeBron
being a winner
and Bill
Michael
Russell.
Jordan and stuff. Yeah. You make the world easier for those around you. He's as good as anybody in the league right now at that. And then you look at the actual. I mean, you can look at the stats. I love what he said about statistics though the other day, where it's just basically they're just numbers. You just use your eyes and watch him like he's a magician. He is just you watch him and you're like, how did he do that?
I said the other day, if you never seen Bird, you'd be like, okay, he's not Bird, but he does Bird-like things.
Sure.
His touch passing, his vision.
He's 70 pounds more than Larry Bird. That's the thing, too. He's like Larry Bird if Larry Bird was just a big, giant octopus. With these crazy long arms and, the balls attached to his hands. I mean, my friend Scott Cacciola at the New York Times once wrote a story about Jokic and his water polo past. And, because that's a huge sport in Serbia and stuff like that. And he throws these water polo passes, where he gets a rebound and with just one hand, cocks the ball back and just whips it.
We saw it the other day.
Yeah. And it's unmatched.
So I want to throw something at you. I'll get to Chris Paul to the Lakers in a second, but I want to ask you something, because I think the three best cultures in sports over the last 15 years have been the Patriots, the Warriors, and Spurs. In terms of pro sports, I got championships. I get defiant coaches. They were ahead of the curve.
The Heat on the edge there?
On the edge, but not enough championships quite. LeBron's kind of, brings those to you. But New England, before Tom left, he had voiced concern on television and to those close. The team was too culture-oriented and slow. The game was changing. Bill's culture was suffocating reality. Stop drafting guards and kickers. Get fast. We've seen what's happened when Tom left. But
it would be nice to have a running back every once in a while. Yes.
Greg Popovich. They're 30th in three-point shooting since 2015. Your culture's great. Get shooters. So Coach K and Saban, both iconic collegiate coaches, moved a little out of their culture. They maintained a culture. But Coach K said, we're going to be a one-and-done program. That was a real shift. Remember, for years, they wouldn't hang your banner if you didn't graduate.
Yeah.
Mike changed this culture. Still maintained high principle. Nick Saban, when they first got to Bama, it was linebackers and corners. And then it became quarterbacks and receivers. He spread the offense out. The tempo was faster. They played a different game. Lane Kiffin got in his ear. Saban, smart enough. So I look at the Warriors, and I see this headline today. Number one thing in the offseason is to rebuild that culture. No, it's not. It's to get bigger. It's to not re-sign Clay. They're doing a New England, and they're doing a San Antonio, which is the culture starts suffocating all this sports stuff. The only reason the Miami culture means bupkas is Jimmy Butler's great. If he's off that team, you're not a playoff team. Culture matters. But athleticism, twitching of size.
I think culture, it matters, but not in the all capital letter way we kind of project it, right? Obviously, right? Talent is the most important thing. You want to see a good coach, give them good players, right? You want to see a good coach that struggles, give them bad players.
Pop.
Yeah. That is what it is. And I think, Popovich has shown, and if you track back pre-2015, they did change styles, from the more Robinson, Duncan-focused teams to a more Tony Parker, more Kawhi Leonard towards the end. And they did switch things up. I do think, though, so I was texting with an executive this morning about this very same thing, which is sort of this idea of when do you move off a path? If you are on a path, right? You don't want to be sentimental, for sure.
Thank you.
But you also don't want to fix what isn't as broken as maybe it is, as you think.
So how broken are the Warriors?
That's a really good
They're
question.
getting really old.
I think they're definitely getting old. There will be a moment in which, they are not a credible contender. But I don't know. I think like sprinting into rebuilds stink. Like, they are painful. I'm from Chicago. Like, that the Jordan rebuild that the Jerry Krause sprinted into lasted a decade. Like, it's not a fun time. And they have stars. They do have an established culture for sure. But they have won different ways, right? Like, last year, that team looked very different than, the Kevin Durant version of the Warriors, which looked very different than the pre-Kevin Durant version of the Warriors. So I trust them to be able to sort of massage what they have. They do have to change. They can't be exactly the same. They've been limited by, and they will continue to be limited by, you miss on some, Steve Kerr caught a little flack for this, but like, you miss on some picks, like, you don't establish the same depth and have the same role players.
Wiseman, right?
But I mean, look, I think the bet, like, that maybe Moses Moody is a better player, that maybe they'll figure something out with Kuminga.
Yeah.
And if not, they can use those players to augment what they have. I think you have the most important thing in the NBA, which is you have a transcendent player in Stephen Curry.
A really smart coach.
You have a good coach, and you have players that know each other.
Yeah.
I think there's value in that. I think I think sometimes culture is, if you view it rigidly, it can hold you back. If a good culture, though, is flexible. And the reason why I mentioned the Miami Heat is like the backbone of their culture is that if we bring you here, we believe in you. We don't care if you played at Lewis University like Max Strus did. Yeah. Like, we don't care. Like Duncan Robinson played at a Division III before he went to Michigan. We don't care about that stuff. We don't care if you were undrafted. We don't care if you were a top 5 pick. Like, you are going to fit what we do, and we're going to make it work, and we're going to find what you do best, and we're going to bend to that. Like, every coach, you think Pat Riley at his core wants to see Duncan Robinson running around shooting contested threes like that? Pat Riley is a super tough-nosed player, coached a super tough-nosed team in New York. That was more of who he is. What good cultures do is they allow people to express themselves, to be themselves in their craft, and you open your arms to that.
So Chris Paul to the Lakers. I said earlier, I've been very lucky. I've worked for good companies. Anytime a company stumbled or I had questions about the direction, there was always one thing I asked. Who's making the decisions now? Warriors, Heat, Kansas City Chiefs, Eagles, Howie Roseman. I know exactly how he's running that franchise. Nick Sirianni's coaching it. When you get into trouble, it's who's running the franchise? Chris Paul to the Laker rumors feels like LeBron would be running the franchise. I think Chris Paul and LeBron similarly. The Celtics' 2 best players are young, prime, 70 games, big minutes. They can handle some age. But when your 2 best players are AD and LeBron, the worst thing is, here's another guy that plays 48 nights, and by the way, he'll be on the IR 3 times. Chris Paul, to me, doesn't work with the Lakers.
I think any decision, and I wrote about this a little bit in our Lakers newsletter this week, any decision that a team makes is, I think in a vacuum, like a lot of what you're saying makes total sense. I think, though, but if you look at cost, if you look at role acceptance and like the opportunity that Chris Paul would have and what he'd be willing to do, I think it starts to make more sense if his vision is aligned with yours. If he is signing with the Lakers to be a 30-minute-a-game player, the starting point guard, the guy who pulls all the strings.
Where's Austin Reeves go?
Well, I mean, Austin has played off the ball. But what I would say, like, generally speaking, is if that is what he is signing up for, you are setting yourself up for failure. Like, they just went through a version of this in terms of with Russell Westbrook where they were spending $47 million on a player that wasn't giving them $47 million of production. If you're paying Chris Paul the minimum, like, why not? Like, to me, that I view.
Chris likes money.
He does like money, and he's going to get. He's going. If he gets waived, he's going to get $15 million of his contract, and it'll. But I mean, if he wants to go win, none of these teams that are close to winning have $20 million to hand Chris Paul. Like, they don't have it. They have either the mid-level exception, the mid-level exception, or the veterans minimum. Like, that is going to be those are going to be his contract options. And I think, and certainly I think there is a cost in which Chris Paul makes sense. You can look at, sort of this notion of like a part-time, like you mentioned, 45 games or whatever. If they're the right 45 games, it's not an issue. If they're the wrong 45 games,
but you also you
don't know.
You get into a Brooklyn situation where those three guys never played together. You get to the playoffs and they played 11 games, and you're like, yeah, our chemistry stinks. The reason Miami's winning,
I don't think it's a horrible. Just on the record, I don't think it's a horrible idea. I think it is something that, if you were paying him in unrestricted free agency and you were like sitting down ready to offer him a $60 million contract over 2 years, I would say that's a bad idea.
It's a horrible
I
idea.
think at there is a price point here where you can benefit on the fact that you benefit from the fact that the Suns are paying him a chunk of money, that he wants to win, that he obviously loves Los Angeles, has his family is still here,
and you'd
stuff
have
like
Austin
that.
Reeves play off the ball,
and you have other guys. Well, I mean, if he's going to miss all these games, like I think, and ideally play a more limited role as you try to save him, you should have enough guys, whether it's Austin Reeves. It's not Chris Paul or. I think it's Chris Paul and, at the minimum, right? It's Chris Paul and you can re-sign D'Angelo Russell. It's Chris Paul and Austin Reeves. It's Chris Paul and Rui Hachimura. And you would have all of these guys, and you have this other guy sort of just waiting for the moment. Now, the question becomes, is he going to accept that, and will he stay in a good enough rhythm? I think you can look at like Miami with Kyle Lowry, and they've reduced his role, right? All-star player, career star.
They don't
and
have
they pay
a ball
him.
handler.
They pay him $40+ million, or I'm sorry, not 40+, like $25 million, I think. But they've used him in more of a hybrid sort of role.
But I would argue this: Bam and Butler do not initiate offense. LeBron and Austin Reeves do. I've already got that.
Chris Paul's been off the ball 3 of the last 4 years. Like, really. Like, I mean, he played off the ball with James Harden. He's become a much better catch-and-shoot player. He had a really bad shooting season 2 years ago. Shot the ball pretty well this year. And I think, like, I feel like I'm caping for him right now. But again, I think, like, there is a cost point here where the risk is so low and the upside is high that it makes sense to do. I think certainly his relationship with LeBron James is a factor in all of these things. Like, right? Like, they're part of the famous banana boat crew and stuff like that. But I think if you can have him on the floor and you expect less of him, you can lessen his burden, that you provide him, instead of looking at Austin Reeves and D'Angelo Russell as hindrances to that. These are things that if Chris Paul is willing, like I was going to say, I think there are people in the organization who still view value there. I think, and it's D'Lo or what too, right? So. I think it's you sound like Jason talking about Charles Barkley. I think that the thing will be, again, Chris Paul could be one of the. I had him say this, an insurance policy. I feel like he just got a check from State Farm when I said that. But
all right, let's segue out of this.
Yeah.
Okay, finally, first time I think Dame's considering moving.
Yep.
Butler, Bam, Dame feels like the best team in the East. It makes sense. They have players that they could give.
Sure.
They've got draft picks. They've got players. Chance, and by the way, Chris Haynes said yesterday is like, yeah, first time I've heard somebody say it's a possibility. You buy it?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think that, they're at an interesting fork in the road, right? And I mean, I think if you believe in Scoot Henderson, right, and I think a lot of people do.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself, if you're Portland, like, what's best for this franchise? Is it placating a star who's been incredibly loyal and been incredibly valuable?
Beat up.
Yeah, but a guy who is taking you to a conference finals once, but like really is limited defensively or whatever, and needs more help, right? I don't think the 3 pick gets them the kind of help that they need to get to the level they want to go.
No.
So it's probably best for their franchise to draft Scoot Henderson. And then it becomes, well, what's best for Damian Lillard? Like, what does he want to do? Does he want to be a part of, by the way, I believe Scoot Henderson, Damian Lillard, Anthony Simons can play together, certainly over the course of a season.
But he's a rookie. He's not going to
play. He's a rookie, yeah. He's not gonna totally move the needle for you in that way. But if Dame wants to move on, I mean, like, this seems like a window in which to do it. It also kind of feels like a time when, the stars that are going to be kind of out there in trade rumors, like it's not a super robust market. That kind of felt like it was more last summer. Donovan Mitchell, Rudy Gobert, like the Jazz blow up and stuff like that. I think, Kevin Durant got traded already. James Harden has been moved already. And seems like that's a two-way street between Philly and Houston. Like there is maybe a really opportunity here for Portland to recoup good value and to move forward at a logical starting point with, the future face of your franchise. It should Dame one out.
Dan Woike, good stuff. Good seeing
guys.
you. Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.